The boardroom was a battlefield. Tension hung thick in the air as the final signatures of a $500 million deal were just moments away from being inked. The executives were primed, their eyes trained on the clock, counting the seconds. The deal would change everything, securing their futures and cementing their place at the top of the corporate ladder. But as the CEO reached for the pen, a figure in the doorway halted him. A maid, a quiet presence in the background, stood frozen. Behind her, her daughter, barely a teenager, stepped into the room, eyes wide with a secret too powerful to keep. In that moment, the air shifted. The lavish conference table, the polished executives, the anticipation, they all faded into the background as the daughter's words broke the silence. What she said was simple, but the truth she carried was explosive. This deal, it's a trap. The room fell silent. The executives looked at each other, confusion flashing in their eyes. What could a maid's daughter possibly know? What was she doing here? And more importantly, how could she have known the darkest secret hidden within the $500 million deal? The clock ticked. What would have been a monumental day for the company was now on the brink of disaster. The stakes were higher than ever. The maid's daughter, a small figure standing at the doorway, felt like an intruder in a room filled with towering suits and important faces. The CEO, a man in his mid-50s, stood frozen, his hand still hovering over the contract, the pen poised to sign what would mark the peak of his career. His gaze shifted from the young girl back to the executives, who seemed just as stunned. How had she gotten past security? What business did a child have in this room, let alone interrupting a deal that had been years in the making? Her mother, the maid, stood quietly behind her, wringing her hands nervously. She had worked for this company for over a decade, cleaning floors and handling things no one else cared to notice. The CEO had always treated her with politeness, but there was no mistaking the unspoken line between them. He was at the top, and she was below. Yet her daughter was different. Her daughter had always seen things, noticed things that no one else did. It wasn't just the way she watched the executives closely, her eyes darting from one to another, as if reading between their words. No, there was something more. There was a fire in her, a hunger for truth. The CEO cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Young lady, this is a private meeting." "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice cool but strained, hoping to dismiss the girl without causing a scene. But the girl wasn't fazed. She stepped forward, her small frame radiating an authority far beyond her years. "I'm not supposed to be here, I know," she said, her voice steady. "But I heard things. Things that you should know." A wave of whispers rippled through the room. The executives, who had once looked at her with dismissive eyes, were now paying close attention. What could she have heard? What could she possibly know about the deal they had been tirelessly preparing for? Her eyes locked with the CEO's, and she spoke again, quieter now, but no less confident. "It's a trap. The deal you're about to sign, it's not what it seems." The room went still. The $500 million deal that everyone had been waiting for, the one that promised expansion, wealth, and power, was now under threat from the unlikeliest of sources. A child, the daughter of the maid. The girl who had nothing to her name but the secrets of the house she'd grown up in. The CEO's face tightened, and for the first time that day, doubt crept into his mind. How could she know? The deal was airtight, vetted by lawyers and analysts for months. Every document, every number, every word had been scrutinized. Yet this girl, she was speaking with a certainty that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice more cautious now, a hint of unease creeping in despite himself. The girl took a deep breath, gathering her courage. She wasn't afraid of the powerful men around her. She had seen enough to know they weren't invincible, that they had weaknesses. She had watched them from the shadows, listening to their conversations when they thought no one was paying attention. It had all started to add up in her mind. The whispers, the strange meetings, the way certain documents disappeared when they shouldn't have. "There's something wrong with the contract," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's not just about the money. There's a clause in it, an Arabic clause. It wasn't in the original draft. I overheard one of the lawyers talking about it. It's a trap, I promise." A murmur ran through the room. The CEO's face darkened, his hand tightening around the pen. The language of the clause she was referring to was something only a few of the executives at the table could understand, but what they did understand was that this wasn't something to take lightly. He motioned for one of the senior executives to pull up the latest version of the contract on the screen. As the document appeared, he scanned it quickly, his eyes flicking over the terms and conditions. There it was, a clause written in Arabic. The font was different, and it didn't match the rest of the document. A red flag. He turned to the lawyer who had prepared the contract. "Why is this clause here? What does it mean?" His voice was sharp now, his calm veneer cracking under the pressure. The lawyer, a seasoned professional who had been with the company for over 15 years, looked at the clause with growing horror. He fumbled for words, his hands shaking slightly. I don't know. That wasn't in the original draft. It must have been added later." The CEO's face twisted in disbelief. "Later, who added it? And why?" The lawyer opened his mouth but hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. I'll have to look into it." But the damage was done. The deal that was meant to elevate the company to new heights now seemed precariously close to falling apart. And as the girl stood there watching them all, she knew something they didn't. She knew that what they were about to sign wasn't just a business agreement, it was something far more dangerous. The room was filled with tension. The stakes had just gotten higher and everyone was on edge. What was the hidden agenda behind that clause? And how could this young girl have uncovered something that the experts had missed? The atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted from tension to outright suspicion. The silence was deafening as the CEO turned the screen toward him, his eyes scanning the Arabic clause again and again. The words felt alien, out of place, like a puzzle piece that didn't belong. He'd been so focused on the numbers, the power plays, the media impact of the deal, that he hadn't even considered the language, the intricacies of the contract beyond the surface. The maid's daughter stood by the door, her small body tense but her posture unwavering. She was used to being ignored, brushed aside, treated like an invisible presence in the world of the powerful. But not today. Today, her silence spoke volumes. The room began to hum with activity, the executives whispering amongst themselves. A few murmured in disbelief, while others scrolled through the contract on their devices, trying to decipher the clause. One of them, a middle-aged man with glasses, squinted at the text before turning to the lawyer. "What does it mean? Why is this here?" The lawyer's face had drained of color. He was no longer the confident, seasoned professional everyone had trusted. His voice trembled as he muttered, I'll need to consult a specialist. It's not something I can translate quickly." The CEO slammed his fist on the table, making everyone jump. "Why didn't you catch this?" he snapped. "You're telling me no one noticed this before? How did we get this far?" The room fell silent again. Everyone had been so focused on the business aspect, on the deal that promised riches and global expansion, that they had overlooked the smallest of details, the language of the clause. The girl had seen it when no one else did, and now the consequences of that oversight were about to unfold. The CEO's mind raced. Could this be a mistake? Could it just be a simple error? Or was this something far more sinister? As the room erupted in hushed conversations, the maid's daughter's voice broke through again. I heard them talking. "The lawyers. They were saying it's a safeguard, but it's not for your protection. It's for someone else. I don't know who, but I know it's not for you." Her words were blunt, each one hanging in the air like a weight, dragging down the room's confidence. The CEO looked up at her, a mix of disbelief and frustration in his eyes. "And how exactly did you hear this? You're just a child, a maid's daughter. What could you possibly know about business contracts?" But the girl didn't flinch. She had heard it all, whispers, secretive meetings in the late hours, discussions masked by an air of professionalism but laden with unspoken threats. She had overheard the lawyers' conversations when they thought no one was listening. They hadn't known she was paying attention. "I hear a lot more than you think," she said quietly, her words dripping with a wisdom that seemed too heavy for someone her age. "I know you've all been so busy with your deal, you didn't think someone like me would notice. But I heard them, talking about how this deal would benefit someone else if it goes through. Not you, not your company. Someone else." The CEO's face twisted with anger. "Enough of this nonsense. We don't have time for games." But the maid's daughter wasn't done. She stepped closer, her eyes locked onto his. This deal isn't just about the money. It's about control. You think it's just a simple investment, but it's a trap designed to give someone else power. Power over you. Over your company. The room grew colder. The CEO's mind whirled as the implications of her words began to settle in. What if this was true? What if the contract wasn't just about money, but something deeper? Something designed to enslave them in ways they couldn't even fathom? The maid's daughter didn't wait for a response. She continued, her voice steady but filled with an eerie confidence. There's more. I overheard them saying it would create a financial dependency. A trap they could use to squeeze your company, push you into corners where you have no choice but to give in. One of the executives, a woman with sharp features and a calculating gaze, stood up suddenly. What are you implying? That the whole deal is rigged? That we're being set up? Her tone was a mix of disbelief and growing fear. The girl nodded, her eyes never leaving the CEO's. Exactly. You're about to sign away your company's autonomy. And once that clause is activated, you won't be able to walk away. They'll own you. There it was. The truth hanging in the balance. It was the kind of realization that no one wanted to face. The kind that shook the very foundation of everything they had built. The executives exchanged glances, some with shock, others with anger, as the gravity of the situation began to settle in. The maid's daughter had exposed something they hadn't even considered. The CEO felt a cold sweat forming on his brow. This is impossible. We've been working on this deal for months. Everything has been scrutinized. The financials are solid. The terms are clear. But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. How could they have missed something so crucial? And why hadn't anyone questioned the sudden appearance of this clause? We've been played, the lawyer finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. This wasn't an accidental addition. Someone wanted this clause in there. It wasn't meant to protect us. It was meant to enslave us. The CEO's mind raced. He turned back to the maid's daughter, his voice quiet now, a mix of desperation and disbelief. Who's behind this? Who's pulling the strings? The girl's gaze hardened. You know who. You've seen the names, the corporations involved, but they've been operating in the shadows behind closed doors. You never thought to look. The revelation hit like a punch to the gut. The deal, which had once seemed like the key to everything they'd worked for, was now a dark web of deception designed to control them. And the girl, the maid's daughter, had seen it before anyone else. The room was suffocating, the walls closing in as the CEO stood frozen, trying to digest the enormity of the situation. The once confident executives, once certain that the $500 million deal would take them to untold heights, now felt like pawns in a game they couldn't comprehend. The girl, just a child, had unraveled a web they couldn't even see, let alone understand. The maid's daughter stood resolute, her hands folded in front of her. The fear that might have accompanied such a confrontation was absent from her eyes. It was as if she had known all along that her words would strike with this level of force. She wasn't speaking as a maid's daughter anymore. She was speaking as someone who knew the truth, as someone who had seen the strings that others were too blind to notice. The CEO's voice broke the tense silence. Tell me who's behind this. I need names. I need to understand how this happened. The girl's gaze flickered to the contract, still displayed on the screen, and then back to the CEO. The people you've trusted, those partners, are not what they seem. They've been operating in the shadows, manipulating the deal in ways you'll never understand. The Arabic clause? It's the key to unlocking their real plan. The room was dead quiet. One of the executives, a man in his 40s with dark circles under his eyes, stepped forward. We've checked everything. The clause, it's legit. We have the translators, the experts. This is a legitimate business practice in some parts of the world. The maid's daughter shook her head slowly. It's a loophole, a way to extract power without you even realizing it. It's buried in the legalese, masked under the guise of something innocent. But the moment you sign it, you give them leverage over you, over your company, over everything you've worked for. The tension in the room reached its peak. The executives turned their gaze to the lawyer who had been the one to facilitate the contract's creation. His face was ashen, his lips trembling. I didn't add the clause, he whispered, barely audible. But I know who did. The CEO turned to him, his eyes sharp as daggers. Who? Who's pulling the strings, and why didn't you say anything? The lawyer swallowed hard, the truth spilling out in pieces. It was a higher authority, someone you never suspected, someone who has a stake in your company, more than you'll ever know. They paid for the clause to be inserted. I didn't see it coming. The CEO stepped back, his mind spinning. Who could possibly have that kind of power? Who could manipulate everything we've built from behind the scenes? The maid's daughter answered softly. You've been working with them for years. The corporation that handles your international dealings. They've been using you, stringing you along, feeding you promises of expansion and growth. All the while, they were planning to take control of everything you've built. And once that clause is activated, it's too late to walk away. You'll owe them everything. A chill ran through the CEO as he realized the truth. The international corporation that had appeared to be the golden ticket, the partner that would help them conquer new markets, had been the one pulling the strings all along. The deals, the meetings, the partnerships, they had all been manipulated to bring them to this very moment. The clause wasn't a safeguard. It was the first step in a larger scheme to control their company, their assets, and their futures. And then, like a bolt of lightning, the thought struck him. The daughter! She must have known about the deal. She's been working for them, hasn't she? She's been planted here to expose the flaw, to make sure this moment happens. The maid's daughter's eyes flickered with something close to regret. I wasn't supposed to be the one to expose it. But I couldn't stay silent. You were all so blinded by the money, the fame, the promises. But there's something bigger at play here, a hidden agenda. I can't even begin to explain the full scope of it. But I know enough to see the truth. The CEO's heart pounded in his chest. The room had turned into a battleground, and it wasn't just about a $500 million deal anymore. It was about survival, control, and the ultimate betrayal. But it wasn't too late. Not yet. The clause was a trap, yes, but it was a trap with a way out. The CEO's eyes locked on the maid's daughter once more. What do we do now? Her response was simple, but her words cut through the tension like a sharp blade. You don't sign. You walk away from the deal. You confront them. Expose them for who they really are. You've got the power to turn this around, but you have to act fast. If you sign that paper, it's over. It's not just your company that's at risk. It's everything you've ever built. It's the freedom you thought you had. The room fell silent, every eye trained on the CEO, waiting for him to make the decision that would determine their fate. His hands trembled, his mind racing. But in that moment, something shifted. He wasn't just the CEO anymore. He wasn't just a man caught in a web of business dealings. He was a person who had been given a choice to stop the inevitable, to take control back from the shadows. He took a deep breath and stood tall. We don't sign the deal. We fight this. We expose them. No more games! The room erupted in a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The moment had come. Everything they had worked for hung in the balance. But there was no turning back now. The girl, the maid's daughter, stood quietly in the corner, a slight smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She hadn't done this for recognition or praise. She had done it because she believed in the truth. And now it was up to them to make the right choice. As the executives huddled together making plans, the CEO's mind raced. He had just made the hardest decision of his life, but it was the right one. And as they prepared to fight back, he realized the battle for his company was only just beginning. But now, at least, they had a fighting chance. The decision had been made, but the weight of it still hung heavily in the air. The CEO stood at the front of the room, his posture resolute but his thoughts a whirlwind. He had just taken a stand against forces far larger and more powerful than his company, but for the first time in weeks he felt a sense of clarity. The deal, the power, the fame, it had all been a mirage, and the real battle was something much deeper. His mind drifted back to the maid's daughter, who had been the catalyst for this moment. She hadn't asked for anything. She hadn't sought a reward or recognition. She had simply seen what no one else could. Her words had cut through the murk of greed and ambition, offering a glimpse of the truth that no one else had dared to see. As the executives gathered around, making frantic calls and drafting emergency plans to halt the deal, the CEO turned to the girl, his voice softer now. You've saved us. But how did you know? How did you see all of this? The girl, still standing by the door, met his gaze with a quiet intensity. I see more than you think. I see how people talk when they think no one is listening. How they plan behind closed doors. You've been so focused on the money and the expansion, but I noticed the shifts, the little things, the way people moved in and out of the building, the way the lawyers acted differently. They were all in on it. The CEO nodded, absorbing her words. And you were right. All along, we were blind to the truth. We were so focused on growth that we couldn't see the danger until it was almost too late. But now we fight back. The girl's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no joy in it. The fight won't be easy. You've made an enemy, a dangerous one. But it's not just your company that's at risk. It's the people you've all built this for, the employees, the families that depend on you. If you fall, they fall too. That's the real fight. Her words struck a chord deep within him. It wasn't just about business anymore. It wasn't about wealth or recognition. It was about the people who had given their lives to make this company what it was, the ones who trusted them. It was their future that hung in the balance. The room filled with movement as the executives prepared to take action. Calls were being made to lawyers, the media, and stakeholders. But even in the midst of the storm, there was a strange sense of unity. The moment of truth had arrived, and they were no longer just a group of businessmen. They were a team, united in their decision to fight back, to expose the deception before it was too late. The CEO turned to the girl again, his voice steady but filled with gratitude. Thank you. For everything. You've done more than anyone could have imagined. The girl nodded, her expression unreadable. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because the truth matters. People matter, and someone had to stop it. The words echoed in the CEO's mind long after she had spoken them. It was easy to get lost in the world of contracts and figures, to become consumed by the game of business. But in that moment, he realized that the true measure of success wasn't wealth or power. It was the ability to do the right thing, to stand up against the forces that sought to manipulate and control. As the day drew to a close, the CEO looked out the window of his office, the city skyline stretching before him. It had been a long, hard road, but they had come through it together. They had chosen to fight for something bigger than themselves, for the people they had promised to serve. And in that fight, they had reclaimed not only their future, but their integrity. The maid's daughter had been right. The battle wasn't over. The fight against the shadowy forces that sought to control them had only just begun. But they had made a stand. They had seen the trap before it could close around them, and they had fought back. And as the CEO turned to rejoin the team, his thoughts were clear. The deal was off. The enemy was exposed. The truth had won. But this wasn't just a victory for them. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been overlooked, manipulated, or silenced. It was a victory for the people who believed in integrity over power, truth over lies. It was a victory that would echo far beyond the walls of that boardroom. And as the CEO walked back into the heart of his company, he knew that no matter how hard the fight ahead might be, they were ready for it. They were no longer just players in a game. They were fighters. And they would never be controlled again. The girl's words stayed with him long after the day had ended. The truth matters. People matter. He knew that he would carry that with him for the rest of his life, guiding every decision, every move. The battle was far from over, but now they had the strength to face it, and they would win.